Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Eichling. I'm with Youth Do Vote, and I'm honored to be here today with these panelists. I'm going to introduce them real quickly. We have Yadira Sanchez, who is Executive Director of Poder Latinx. We have Bianca Rosales, who is Director of Partnerships with Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, and Matthew Baiza, who is a youth voter advocate and is the Texas director for NextGen America. So we have lots of great youth representation here. In addition to the work that they've done with their current organizations, they have lots of background in working on campaigns and organizing young people. So I'm excited to learn from them today, and hopefully you are too. So I wanted to start first by we're talking about the youth vote, and I wanted to take all of us back to when we were 18. I won't say how long ago that was for me, but I had this realization recently just what that process was like when I was a first-time voter. And so I wanted to just kind of, again, take us all back to that. But one thing we know, even though we were young, all of us were young at one time, we weren't apathetic. And today's youth are not apathetic. I think that they need support. And so I wanted to ask all of you, since we were all once first-time voters, tell us what you remember about being a first-time voter, what you were most excited about, what motivated you, and did anything ever discourage you from voting back then?
I guess we'll go down the line if that works. Hi, everybody. Just to introduce myself, my name is Matthew Baiza. I'm the Texas State Director at NextGen America. NextGen is the nation's largest youth voter registration and engagement organization, and we operate in 8 states, including Texas. So to your question, I actually want to start by the first time that I did not vote, but could have voted, which was in 2014 for me. I turned 18. And that year was a midterm year. That year was also my first year of college where I was out of state. So for me that year, trying to understand and navigate the process of being able to vote when I am about 2,000 miles away was very difficult. So much so that I missed the deadline to request my application to vote by mail and get that submitted in time, and did not vote in the 2014 election. It actually wasn't until 2015 when I was home and there was a special election going on in one of my districts that I was able to vote in that race. And so I think one of, my story a little bit, right, is the challenges that sometimes come with voting, especially voting for young people. The 2016 election, I was also in college. I was out of the state, and I had to vote by mail as my first presidential election. And so, for me, being able to have to learn my mistakes that I made the first time and know when I needed to request my ballot and then having to get it in on time was definitely a lot of barriers that not a lot of young people, especially if they're not educated on that process, it's not easy to navigate or understand, right? There's a very specific things to the process when you apply to vote by mail, right? Here in Texas, you have to request for all of the elections, right, to be able to vote in those elections. And we know that it has become even harder to be able to successfully vote by mail, particularly for a lot of young people. So for me, right, it was maybe not the most memorable first time voting. I remember it. My family and I went to vote at Maverick Library. I remember that. And I think when we talk about those challenges, my experience and really walking that process is an example of what young people sometimes face in being able to vote.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Yadira Sanchez. I'm the Executive Director of Poder Latinx. We're a civic and social justice organization dedicated to building political power for the Latino community so we can win on economic, environmental, and immigrant justice. I'm a proud daughter of Mexican immigrants who came to this country via Coyote back in the 80s, and they settled in Southern California. So growing up, unfortunately, they weren't able to vote. My mom's first time voting was in 2016, and my dad's first time voting was in 2020, and I helped them and I encouraged them and empowered them to vote. But growing up, I got a lot of encouragement of higher education, and I think we've been echoing that how important it was to get education, higher education, not necessarily voting. So my first time voting was in college when I attended UC Santa Barbara, and my friend was going voting, and she said, "You want to come?" And I said, "Where are you going?" "Voting." I'm like, sure. I mean, I'm registered, let's go. I really didn't know. No one guided me through the process. No one told me what to expect. No one told me what was on the ballot. So the first time was a little bit of anxiety and anxiousness of not knowing if I was doing it right. But I would say the key factor that we constantly hear time and time again with especially young voters is that trusted person, especially if you know that person, if they're your friend, if they're your relative, to invite you to vote and walk you through the process. And that is part of what we do. We focus on new voters, and that includes voters that are aging into the electorate and also naturalized citizens like my parents who became citizens at their later age and they're voting for the first time, because we know that first time is important. Everyone remembers the first time, remembers the feeling, and we try to make as easy as possible, having all the information, having the support system, so we cast not only a vote, but an informed vote.
Hi, everyone. Like Heather said, my name is Bianca Rosales. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as a director of partnerships for the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. We are the nation's largest network dedicated to increasing college student voter engagement. My experience, I'm very privileged in a lot of ways. My source of political activism and engagement really stems from my family and my community. My family, I grew up on the south side of San Antonio, raised by my mother, who taught me the power of education and dedicated her life to giving back to our community, still does to this day. And the family that I grew up in, also very politically engaged, activists. My grandfather, a professor of political science, really taught me about political action and engagement at such a young age, and my grandmother kind of watching firsthand her leadership, fighting for Mexican Americans and fighting for Latinos all across the country. And getting to spend time with my father and block walking with him before I could ever vote. I remember knocking on doors and kind of watching him as he would connect with people, everyday people who felt like their voice didn't matter, and understanding how their everyday issues translate to the policies that people that we're voting into office have an impact on, and why they should care. And so getting to watch all of that was really, honestly, just made me always really feeling honored to be able to engage in our democracy. And so when I turned 18, of course, I was ready to want to vote. Like, that was like the dream, right? But even then, even with that priming and that background, I remember still feeling overwhelmed. I was at UT Austin, and it was 2012, presidential election, and I made a choice to vote in Austin just because I felt overwhelmed by, I didn't know what, like, I could go back to San Antonio. I still felt very overwhelmed by like what my options were at that point. So I chose Austin, and I had to figure out how to register there. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I definitely know who I'm voting for president, but I don't know the other more local offices. And feeling similar to what was said here is like kind of feeling anxiety, feeling kind of inadequate. And that's a common sentiment that a lot of young people feel, especially, when they're college student coming from out of state. That's not an uncommon thing to feel, right? So there was that piece. I think the other piece that I was feeling, beyond like kind of lack of confidence on that front was I was feeling really grateful. So taking a step back, at UT Austin at that time, we had a polling location on campus. Right now in Texas and in a lot of other states, there are attacks on the youth vote, and one of the ways that they're attacking is trying to remove polling locations from college campuses. That is an issue, right? And so for me, luckily we had a polling location. And even, like I said, even with this excitement that I had for voting, I'm not sure that with my full-time school schedule, with my working on campus part-time, living on campus, I didn't have a car my first year. I'm not sure that I would have went out of my way, because that would have been a lot for me. And that is true for so many students, right? And so I could go down so many things, but I had so many like different privileges. And now working in the student vote space, I think it's so incredibly important because I'm seeing the same kind of sentiment that I felt, that the sentiments that you're hearing here still exist with young people and students. And so it is our responsibility as a community to fight so that every young person that is going to vote for the first time has easy and equal access, right, to access the ballot box, and not be a privilege, like for some people. Like, honestly, I was privileged in a lot of ways. It shouldn't be a privilege, though. It should be a right. So,
Thank you. Thank you. You guys touched on some of these challenges already. I want to dig a little deeper. So in 2020, as a result of the COVID pandemic, many state legislatures and election administrators enabled greater access to voting by way of mail ballots, early voting, ballot drop boxes. However, in the years since then, we know that new laws have been enacted, and many of them limiting access and taking back some of that some of the things that made it easier. So what are some of the key differences you see in the youth vote in 2020 versus 2024 in relation to the changes in voting rights in those 4 years?
yeah, sure.
I guess we'll stay going in order here. I think that's a really good question that we delve into a little bit more, right? Setting the scene. In 2020, in particular, I'm going to talk about college campuses. College campuses were closed, right? Students were sent home. A lot of them weren't living on dorms or in apartments around the area. And so what you saw, right, was that a lot of people, not just youth, were voting by mail sometimes in that election because they had registered in one county, but they were back at home living in another county. Maybe they had to update their address, maybe they didn't update it. And so, one thing to compare between 2020 and 2024 is that now you have full student populations on college campuses in those precincts that are living there. And so this will be the first time since 2016 where we will see, a full capacity of young people going out to vote in person on a college campus during a presidential election year, right? What we know is that in 2020, 2018, 2022, we've seen the highest youth turnout in midterm and presidential election years that we've seen in our history. And so, if the trend continues, right, and we continue to see that type of engagement with young people, we're going to see a lot of what you may have seen before, long lines on college campuses. I know, as an example, here in 2022, I was actually at UTSA on election day when we had about a 4-hour wait for that students were having to wait in line to go and vote. It was wrapped through the building, out the door, and a lot for I think for a lot of people that are working in the youth voting rights space, that is a major concern. Is how do we ensure that young people have the opportunity and are able to go vote early when they can, but also that they have access to being able to vote on campus on election day when they need to. And so being able to have those resources through our election departments and right through the polling sites is going to be extremely important, and I think something that we're going to see as a big difference, right? If we're planning for the way that people turned out and voted from 2022 to 2024, we're not going to be ready for it, right? This is going to look different in how we see people and the voting methods, particularly young people and their voting methods. So I think that that's one thing that we all need to keep in mind. I think a second thing is the type of engagement, right? A lot of engagement happened in the virtual space. So like many of you all received a lot of text messages, maybe phone calls, right? Urging you to go out and vote. While I'm sure we're going to continue to see that again, we have a lot more opportunity to do in-person engagement and in-person work. And so when we talk about the youth vote, especially at NextGen, we're focused in on engaging young people and meeting them in the spaces and the places where they are. And so some of our primary work is really doing that on the college campuses in person. I'll tell you one of the most effective ways to help get young people and get them engaged is just having a conversation with them, right? In person, face to face. And so our tactics a lot of times is really being on the ground and helping to direct them, giving them those resources. Sometimes it's just, hey, your polling site is just around the corner in the HEB Student Union. It's right there. You can go and vote. Here's a ballot guide, a nonpartisan C3 ballot guide, and we just want to get them the basic information in that sense. And so I think like between 2020, 2024, we're going to see a lot more in-person engagement, and those methods are going to be really important because why? You need a lot of person power on the ground to be able to have those conversations. Finally, I'll just talk about, and I talked about it a little bit, is voting by mail, right? A lot of people, you mentioned in the setup to the question, in 2020 had a lot more access to voting by mail. And we've seen since then a lot of restrictions that have been put in place, right? One of the challenges here in Texas, right, is to request your in your application to vote by mail, you have to include either the last four of your social or either your Texas state ID or driver's license. And when it comes to that, you have to make sure that whatever you write on there is what you wrote on your application, your voter registration application. And so, it's a lot of education. It's a lot of making sure that people understand the process. And I think that, the discouragement that has happened, particularly with access to voting by mail, is something we're going to see different when it comes to the turnout patterns that we see for young people.
I would say definitely to set the stage, 2020, it was a very, COVID really marked that election, and there was a lot on people's minds, especially young people's minds. They were in college, and then school shut down. They had to return home. The biggest barrier for a lot of young people was the registration, because they didn't know if they were registered or not, where they were registered, if they had requested a ballot. So it's like redoing a lot of that. And remember, young people, the biggest obstacle when people always say, oh, why don't more young people vote? Well, we need to find them first, because they're aging into the electorate. If they're not in school, they're back home, then it makes it much more difficult for us to find them and get them registered to vote. So that's always been a hurdle, that they're not in the voter activation files. They don't have a file. That means when we do the text messaging, the phone calls that we do every cycle, we can't call them. We don't have their information. No one can invite you to vote. So that was the biggest hurdle. Something that did come out of 2020 was us really strengthening a digital organizing muscle. Poder Latinx was founded in July of 2019. By March of 2020, we had registered 22,000 people in person. So we pivot from that to digital. Thank you. We pivot from an in-person operation over a weekend to text and phone bank, and it really pushed us to morph, to adapt to our new reality and get creative and innovative. How are we going to reach these young people? How are we going to find them? How are we going to talk to them if we can't talk to them in person like we have been trained to and we've been planning to do? So it really pushed us to be creative and innovative. We launched a webcomic called La Borinqueña in partnership with Somos Arte, the creator of La Borinqueña, to use Afro-Latina heroine to talk to the community. It was very popular with young folks, even outside of the state of Florida. We used it in different other states. We also partnered with Las Cafeteras, a Chicano band from Los Angeles, to use their music as PSAs. We knew everyone was going to be using traditional PSAs, and these was something more innovative and creative. And we also partner with artists. We use art as a method of engagement. Our digital art gallery, Galería de Colores, actually got a Poly Award, so it's an award-winning gallery. We really had to adapt with the new reality, and we saw really promising results. And to be honest, 2024, we're not going back. Folks, especially young people, are still on social media. They still want creative, innovative. We have a short span to get people's attention. It's not like they're going to stay and watch a 5-minute PSA. So whatever we do has to be creative, has to grab people's attention. And we are partnering with different folks. We know influencers, celebrities, they play a role in this too. And this year is the year that most of them want to get involved, wants to get engaged. The election brings a lot of new folks into the civic engagement movement that we usually don't see in every single year. So this year, what we're going to see is more innovation when it comes to campaigns, different voices, and it really goes back to the voter registration, and you're going to be hearing me how key that is, especially for young Latino voters, especially for young Mexican American voters, because we are the majority. The 36.2 million eligible voters, out of that 17 million are projected to vote. That's less than half, and 60% of the electorate are of Mexican descent. So if we solve the key of young people voting this election, our democracy is going to look very different come November 5th.
Yeah, so I want to kind of take time to also kind of setting the scene to 2020. You mentioned in your intro, like the increase of access, right, voting by mail, all of that. All of that's true. It's also true, and putting my student vote perspective hat on, that organizations all across the country really collectively came together, and we organized on college campuses all throughout the country. And the results of that were stunning. So like, to give us some like stats here, according to the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, 66% of college students turned out to vote in 2020. That is huge. That's 14 percentage points higher than they were in the last president before that in 2016. And that's at par with the general population, right? In fact, college students doubled the general population's growth. And so that really, we heard it at the beginning of this panel, right? This narrative that young people don't vote, that college students are apathetic, that they don't care. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We've always known that, right? But now we had the data to show this is what happens when you don't ignore young people and when you don't dismiss them as unimportant, right? And so, I think we can attribute that to, again, the organizational power, the organizing that we saw all over college campuses, the increase of access because of the pandemic. And now, I think you're right to ask this question of what does that mean for us in 2024, right? I'm thinking about voter ID laws. That's what's coming to mind for me, right? There are, as of June of 2023, there are 38 states that have voter ID laws. 23 of them have photo ID laws. 10 of them have even more specific photo ID laws, right? And that is very troubling, and let me tell you why. In a recent survey that was done by one of our coalition partners, Vote Riders, some of you might be familiar with them. Vote Riders, the Center for Civic Engagement at the University of Maryland in College Park, and the Brennan Center for Justice, they did this survey, and what they found was that there were 7.5 million young people ages 18 to, I believe it was 25, do not have a driver's license, okay? In states with strict voter ID laws, photo IDs in particular, right? Since that's a common form of identification that's accepted for voting, that's a particular problem. And so then I think about the 26th Amendment, right? That says that age should not be a barrier for voting. But when you look at the fact that so many young people, and it's not just young people, by the way, you all should definitely check out this study and the analysis of it. It's Black people, it's Latinos, it's pretty horrific what we're seeing. And so these voter ID laws are impacting everyone. But speaking in particular about young people, when we think about the lack of access to IDs, when we think about that coupled with this increase of voter ID laws that have been going on for quite some time now, but now we're seeing it at another level, then yeah, age is kind of a barrier to voting, right? And so how do we fight against that, right? And truly, voter ID laws are part of a broader trend that we're seeing, that we've been seeing for quite some time now, right? In Idaho, there was a law that straight up banned student IDs as a valid form of identification. That's a problem, right? That's going to surely impact the youth vote rate in that state. In Texas, there was legislation that was posed to ban polling locations, I mentioned this earlier, on college campuses. And whether or not these legislations are successful, it almost doesn't matter, because then you still feel the repercussions of that, right? There are still college campuses that, in order to protect themselves from not getting certain funding, they're gonna say, you know what, we just won't have a polling location. And that impacts, and that will dilute the youth vote and college student vote, right? And so, like I said, these are kind of just a couple of examples. We're seeing it in New Hampshire, in North Carolina. If you register to vote and vote on the same day, there was a law that required to send a confirmation to the address that you registered with, and if it got sent back, They wouldn't tell you, your vote just would not count. Can you imagine voting and not knowing if your vote was actually counted toward that election? That's a problem, right? So we're seeing a lot of these laws all across the country that are absolutely going to impact the youth vote. That's not to say, I loved hearing all of the amazing things that are happening. That's to say this is important, and we have to fund organizations like this, and the work that we're doing is so critical, because if we don't, then those laws and the people that are making those laws to stop youth from voting are going to win, and we can't have that.
So thanks to organizations like all of yours, there is a growing infrastructure of civic engagement and voting education on college campuses. However, we know that not everyone goes to college. So, and we know through all of your, what you've shared, that voting laws and requirements can be complicated and confusing for anyone. So what have you found to be the most effective ways to reduce some of those barriers for young people, whether they attend college or not?
Yeah, I think this is a question that I think all of our organizations are having a lot of active conversations on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of points. Number one is the tools that we use, right? So when we're out in the community, like, how are we providing that information? A lot of times it is digitally, right? Young people are online, right? Making sure that we're putting information where it's accessible to them, but also when we're physically in person, how we're getting that information to them, right? Through a lot of times printed material is still a great way for young people to look at and get information. So like the tools that we use and the tactics that we use on the ground and digitally is a big piece of that. And I think when we talk about being online and digitally, it's, we say, like, we have to meet young people where they're at, right? It's the places and the spaces that we show up in. So it can't just be college campuses, right? Like, that is probably like the entrance point for a lot of organizations that are doing youth work, but it's not the only space. So a couple of examples that I know we do at NextGen, we actually created AI is like a big thing right now, right? The future is AI. So there's a kind of an app called Discord where young people can play video games on or have other conversations, share videos, make a community. We actually created at NextGen an AI bot that is called Voti, that is going to be accessible and be uploaded into these spaces, these Discord channels or servers that people can add that just give them general information about, voter IDs if they have questions about that, or how they can vote by mail, or basic information about the election that's coming up. And so it's about being able to use our tools and our tactics in the spaces where young people are. We know that a lot of young people are digitally and are online, and we need to engage communities, right, of young people. So that's one example. I think another space, right, is NextGen. We've launched our Men's Voting Power program, which is focused on Black and brown young men and really engaging them, making sure that they are civically engaged and prepared to vote this upcoming election, right? So that means going to spaces where these young people are. We had a partnership actually with the Super Bowl and with the NFL in Las Vegas, and we did some programming with them, right? Because we need to make sure we're engaging young people in those spaces, right? Athletics is a big piece of it. We mentioned previously the influencers. NextGen was one of, I think, the first organizations to really take advantage of the NIL, and we had launched a college athlete influencer program, right? Why? Because for young people, their peers, college athletes on campuses or even in the community, are people they look up to. They're trusted messengers, right? And so being able to utilize those methods is really key to being able to get young people the information that they need to make informed decisions about voting. Two other things I just want to mention is we need to have culturally relevant and culturally in tune practices. So, at NextGen, one of the things that we do in Texas, which I love, is, a lot of young people, regardless of whether they're college students or not, and also not even just young people, love stickers. So we have stickers, and we have a lot of what we call swag that is culturally relevant, right? We have a Loteria sticker that everybody loves when they come across. We have a Let Texans Vote sticker that everybody loves when they come across in our state. And so sometimes that catches people's eye, and then you start a conversation with them about the importance of voting and the importance of being engaged. The last piece I want to mention is partnerships, which we've talked a little bit about, right? Vote Riders is a great partner organization for us, NextGen. partnerships is super key to being able to reduce barriers. At NextGen, we do a lot of work, and a lot of times we lean on our peer organization, the League of Women Voters, to help distribute and give information about nonpartisan ballot guides. And I always am like, all right, when the election's coming around, we're working with the League, not only during the election, but also before that. We do a lot of voter registration work with them. But to be able to make sure we have the information and the resources for young people, I will tell you, we're at a table with ballot guides, young people will grab them, and they're going to look at them before they go and vote. And so being able to have those partnerships is really key to understanding how we can collectively use our resources to engage young people throughout the process.
I'm definitely going to echo a lot of that because Poder Latinx, we have operations in 6 states. We have teams, active teams right now registering our community where they are. And yes, schools is one of the locations. We focus a lot on high schools. We focus on seniors right when they're turning 18. In a lot of our states that allow pre-registration, that is so important. Just think about college conversations. You just don't have them when they're about to graduate. You have to have them as early as possible. So we do a lot of work as early as possible in high schools to make sure that folks are registered. And not only that, but they help their families get registered. We do a lot of relational organizing because we know young people, if they're 16 and they're active and they have family members that can register, that are citizens, that our siblings, our parents, our grandparents, they could organize their entire household, regardless they can vote or not. The other approach that we take is through a siete pata model that we call siete patas, 7 pillars. And that is embedded us working with trusted community stakeholders. Schools is one of them, faith institutions. We know a lot of young people that go to church with their parents. Like that is another form of partnership. Labor unions, if they have work in different companies and they're not going to school, they are some of them might be with labor. We also work with consulates. A lot of consulates, for example, if they're DACA, they're Dreamers, or they have to get any type of identification, they'll be going to the consulates. So that's another entity. We work with media partners. We just launched last week in partnership, supported this amazing historic campaign, Vota Conmigo, on Univision, which is one of our trusted partners that we've been working from day one. Also, MTV, we're proud co-founders of Vote Early Day, and that is the day that we mobilize our community to go vote early. We can't leave it to last minute because we know our people. We can't leave anything to last minute. And also Power the Polls. That was an initiative launched in 2020 to make sure when we knew there were poll monitor gaps, there were going to be a lot of gaps across the country. This program really push young people to step up and sign up as a poll monitor. We also do a lot of work around culture organizing. We know folks love sports. Like we intentionally host watch parties when there's big tournaments. There might be junior leagues, soccer tournaments in different communities. We partner with those leagues to make sure that we can have a table and talk to voters. They're the entire family, not just young people. And then I would say, we try to going back to be as innovative and as embedded in our culture as we can. We love doing fun, creative events. In 2022, we did a cabalgata. We've done some this year as well. For folks that don't know what a cabalgata is a horse parade. We try to embed it with our culture. We have a banda, we have the radio, kind of lead the parade, bring people in. That's been one of the most fun voter engagement activities that I have ever done. And I've always been hearing back like, oh, I wish you guys would do more of these events. Those are fun. I know you probably have heard Party to the Polls a lot. There's a reason why they're popular. It's because folks want to have, especially young people, go with their friends, have a good time, and at the same time, celebrate our democracy. Because remember, folks don't make it easy for us. The fact that we're voting on a Tuesday and not in the weekend, that's a hurdle for a lot of people. A lot of young people that have to go to school, a lot of people that have to work, and they have, tight schedules. They don't have the luxury to go and whenever they feel like it. So we try to just make it as easy, as fun, and culturally connected as we can.
So I gotta say, they're speaking my political love language, partnerships and, talking about all of the different like culturally relevant kind of efforts. I think that's all extremely critical. What I would add to that is kind of, and I think as probably pointing out the obvious here, is that there is no one strategy, right, that's going to reach minority voters, right? I think it's a combination of multiple, many, all of that they shared here and so much more, right? One thing that comes to mind for me in particular is how important it is that we fund, support, uplift BIPOC and minority-led organizations, right? Like Poder Latinx. That's incredibly important. There are so many ones, especially state and local ones, even that are on the ground that need these resources. And to the point of like trusted messengers, right? Organizations like that are key to that, right? And so it's so important that we prioritize that and that that's who we're funding and that we're supporting and uplifting to do this work. The other piece is we need to train and develop community leaders, right? As a community organizer at heart, identifying leaders in the community, right, that are already those trusted messengers in a lot of the ways that they were talking about here, right? That is so critical, but continuing to do that alongside all of the other efforts and consistently, right? Not just during, yes, we're talking about this in the context of 2024, but I think I can probably speak for all of us on here that this is something that we're doing every single year at every point of the year because young people and all people really can tell when it's transactional, right? When you don't actually care about them. And that can't be more obvious, yet that's still what we see time and time again. So refraining from, we have to do better when it comes to supporting and funding and doing this work year round all the time. The other piece is, and this was already kind of brought up, but just to further emphasize it, is accessibility and meeting people where they're at. I just came from the Southside Education Training Center. Shout out to my mom who runs that center. It's a brand new center on the South Side. It is incredible because, and there are other, like in San Antonio, you have the West Side Education Training Center, East Side, et cetera. But these resources, they have free Wi-Fi for the community, right? They have training and development. They have workforce development, but even small business trainings for our community members, right? So what does it look like if organizations, partner with them and are sharing these voter education materials and making sure to reaching people where, because people are reaching out to these resources because that's what they need. So why don't we meet them where they're at, right? And so that actually kind of reminds me, another piece that I wanted to touch on is community colleges, because the SETC, the WETC, community colleges, Alamo Community Colleges, Alamo Community College District is, they oversee the Southside Education Training Center is part of that. And so it makes me think about how important community colleges are. Community colleges are, as you all know, at the heart and soul of so many communities. I'm, like I mentioned, from the South Side, right? So I think about Palo Alto College as like one of the key institutions that yes, we're all students there, but they host events. They bring the community together. They serve, providing these trainings, like I said, small business development, things like that to enhance our community. And not enough for so long. I don't know how many of you know this, but 40% of students at institutions of higher education go to community colleges. 40%. That's huge. But here's the upsetting part, that even though 40% go to community colleges, students at community colleges vote 10% less than their peers at four-year institutions. And that's a problem overall, but then you think about what students are at community colleges, right? Economically, racially diverse students. And so what does that say about our democracy if we're not resourcing and trying to reach students on these campuses? And again, I know the question was about non-students, but I do view community colleges as more broad than just the traditional definition of a student, right? These aren't traditional, they're students adults in a technical sense, but they're community members. And they're the ones that go home every day to their families and communicate with their families about, as a trusted messenger, right? And so we need to reach them. And so one of the things, kind of speaking to our organization, SOSV, we partnered with Levi's, Showtime, MTV, the Good Trouble Collective, All in Campus Democracy Challenge, and we're hosting this community college concert competition. Now, community college, you just have to be a community college. You have to fit certain parameters around nonpartisan action planning, things that we know help turn out the vote. But if the community college that wins the voter registrations on National Voter Registration Day, they get a concert. The art is still to be determined, but let me tell you, it's going to be a big one. And so it's those things, right? They're just the start. National Voter Registration Day is hosting, right now they're giving grants, thanks to, I think, the partnership with Levi's, giving $1,000 to $5,000 grants to community colleges, very specifically, to host voter registration tabling events and events to reach more students, right? So we need to make sure that those resources and those opportunities are, that community colleges are aware of them, that we're connecting them to, and that we're reaching them. Like I said, it's just the start, but those are some things that we're seeing national attention to, and we got to keep up that momentum.
Awesome. Thank you. So we all know we're now less than 6 months away from the presidential election, which we've all heard may be the most consequential election of our time, and it's also a global election year around the world where democracy is being threatened. So what is your call to action for each of us across generations to safeguard and expand access to the ballot for all citizens, and what can we do in our local communities?
That is kind of right the key question. What's next, right? How do we continue doing this work? I think we talked about it. I think I'll go in the broadest sense first. Is resources. We need to put resources and funding into this work, particularly engaging young people. A point that I take away from NextGen was that in 2022 in Texas, we found that 55% of all the contacts that we made, all the people that we contacted turned out to vote that were age 18 to 35. The general population was 33%. So we know that the work that we do, especially in a multi-layered strategy, right, in person and digital work, phone calls, all of the above, help to turn out young people to vote. And so in the first sense, right, is like, funding organizations from the smallest of organizations all the way to like my organization, NextGen, which is one of the largest for youth voter engagement. And so being able to access those resources and to utilize those resources is very key. And not only just at the last second, but we need funding early on and often to be able to build those relationships and put people on the ground and engage over the period of that election cycle, right, to be able to engage young people. We can't just show up at the last second and say, hey, we're here. Like people, that's when they know it's transactional. That's when they don't trust the messenger, right? So building those relationships is really key. In a more individual sense, I would say a couple of things, is encouraging voter access, particularly in spaces where young people are. I'm going to talk about the voting polling places on college campuses, right? There has been a push against not having polling places on some college campuses. We need to make sure that we're going and talking to not only elections administration, but also the administrators on college campuses. They're the ones that help get to decide that yes, we want a polling place here on our campus. So having those conversations and advocating for that, especially for young people who are involved on college campuses, right? You have a direct line, right, to the administration, to your university. And so being able to go and talk to them and advocate for them, right, whether that's at the faculty senate meeting or whether that's at the student senate meeting that's going on, it's going to be really key to ensure that we have those polling sites on campus, and not just like one person checking people in, right, or maybe one polling site, right? Some of our largest campuses in the state of Texas, for example, have up to 60,000, right, people that are on these campuses, and so that is a lot of students concentrated into one space, and one polling site is not enough for those people. And so having those conversations and really talking about how those resources are being allocated is key. I think the last piece of it, right, is volunteering, right? We need people to be out having conversations, being out in the community, right? It can be in person, it can be digitally online. So finding an organization or a cause that you believe in and you support in can work for you. At NextGen, we have a national, what we call distributed volunteer team, about 28,000 volunteers that volunteer with us each cycle to talk to young voters across the country about going out and voting. And so it's pretty easy to join, right? And you can join online via like Zoom, help make phone calls, help send text messages, just encouraging young people and getting them the basic information that they need to be able to go and successfully vote, not only this election, but also all the future elections.
Wow, we have a lot of work to do. I always say that in order for us to have a really successful election cycle, we need three things: time, talent, and resources. We at Poder Latinx, we started early. This, for us, has been a 2-year campaign. I'm very proud to say that up to date, we have registered over 11,000 new Latino voters, and we have a goal of 52, thank you. We have a goal of 52,000 for this year. And to be honest, that's really not enough. Like I mentioned before, our electorate has tremendous potential. This country, our country, has not seen what the Latino vote could do. And for across the country, in many different states, who we elect, the issues that they run on, how they express and talk about our community, about our gente, it really comes down to our political power, our vote. So that's something that we're working on, and we need time, early investment, but I would say year-round investment, because guess what? Whatever happens on November 5th, we're gonna be here. We're going to be here. The work really begins the day after election, because we're going to know who got elected and what does that mean for our community. What does that mean for DACA recipients? What does that mean for the undocumented community? What does that mean for women's rights? So there's a lot at stake, and we don't usually drive through fear. We really lead with hope and empowerment. We do know that we do need talent. Election cycles, this is where everyone is hiring, and everyone wants people from the community. Everyone wants bilingual speakers, because we're in hot demand now. They're courting the Latino vote. They know our power. They have identified it. And this is the year where we really need to develop. I always talk about one of our team members, Eric. Eric started working with us in 2022. He's just a young person, looking for a job. We were paying $22 an hour. It seemed like a good gig. He was able to use those bilingual skills that he learned from his parents and talk to the community about voting. Eric quickly got promoted to Canvas leading one team of 4 canvassers, and he was the captain. Eric now is leading our largest operation, which is in Arizona, leading our entire Canvas team. He just turned 24, literally last month. So this just to show that young people care. All they need is an opportunity. All they need is a little bit of engagement for us to plant seeds, because they can grow into big, powerful, amazing trees. We are also very proud to have launched back in 2020 Poderosas, a fellowship program really geared on building Latina civic empowerment. I myself, and I know many Latina leaders, found ourselves here by, I would say, a chance, maybe luck. One thing led to the other, but it was not the plan. We didn't go to college to say, I'm going to be a Latina civic leader when I grow up. I'm going to be Dolores Huerta. It just happened. But we want to make sure that we're empowering the next generation of Latina leaders to know that it's possible, and it's possible really early on in their careers. They don't have to wait to be older to run for office, to run campaigns, to run organizations. They could be the CEOs and the jefas of their communities really early on. And we're opening cohort 4. We're right now in search of Poderosa fellows. So visit poderlatinx.org. And also poderlatinx.org/vota if you want to check your voter registration status, if you want to know who's on the ballot. That's a whole resource page there that we have available for the community. And then I would say yes to the resources. When we mean year-round, after the election cycle, things usually simmer down. But guess what? Legislative session is early January. So we can't simmer down. We need to continuously be building, figuring out who's in office and how are we going to move our issues and this progressive agenda forward, because a lot is at stake, and our community deserves only but the best. So for folks that are watching, I would say don't wait, register to vote, and remember our power is our vote. So make sure you go vote November 5th.
Awesome. So I have 3 call to actions. My first one is for anyone here that's representing a nonprofit or works with a nonprofit. If you're a nonprofit that's in civic engagement, join the Student Vote movement. Okay, and what I mean by that is join the Students Learn, Students Vote coalition. Many people don't realize this, but colleges have an obligation to make voter registration accessible to their students in the Higher Education Act. Are they doing that? For a number of reasons, being under-resourced and so many others, it's not happening in a lot of colleges. So we need more organizations to help us do this work. So that's my first call to action. The second one is if you are a student watching right now, or if you know of a student, my call to action for you is to get involved in your local community. It is really easy to be disillusioned by what's happening on a national level. I would be lying if I said I don't get disillusioned. But there are so many incredible things that are happening on a local level. There are so many reasons to want to continue to fight. And one tangible way that you can do that is by supporting your local election officials. Local election officials, since 2020, have been seriously under a lot of pressure and need a lot of support. So intern, volunteer, make it a full-on career, whatever that may be for you. But local election officials need your support. And I think that's for students and for anyone who wants to support and protect our democracy. The last thing I would say is, and this is a call to action for everybody, have dialogue and talk to your families and your friends about why this election is so important, about why having their voice heard is so important, and share your personal testimony. We keep talking about trusted messengers. You all are the trusted messengers, and your people trust you. And if you're here today, that must mean there is something in you that wants to see change, and my call to action is for you to do that, to talk to your people. Now, if you're someone who's maybe doesn't feel like this comes natural for you, then my next call to action, I guess, would be to celebrate the civic holidays. We talked about Vote Early Day, National Voter Registration Day, and there's also National Voter Education Week that is meant to fill the gap between registration and actual voting, right? And so by signing up for these civic holidays, you're gonna get a ton of resources, toolkits, things that will help you talk about our democracy, civic engagement, so that you can communicate in a meaningful way with the people that you care about to make sure that their voices are heard and to be able to fight for our loved ones that cannot vote. So that's what I would say my call to actions are, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
I just want to close with 2 things about Texas in particular. I'm born and raised here in San Antonio, and 2 laws. In the 1980s, the state passed a law that high school voter registration is required to be done by principals at least twice a year. It's a law that not a lot of folks know about. There's not necessarily great compliance with this, but that's my call to action to all of you, is that go to your high school and say, hey, are you guys doing voter registration? If you're not, here's a nonpartisan organization that can help you with that. 2, related to supporting your local election officials, students in Texas can work elections at the age of 16. They can miss 2 days of school, get excused absences. So that's something that my organization does, is recruiting high school students to work elections. So another call to action to help your local community. So thank you all so much for everything that you shared with our audience. I hope you all have taken some calls to action for yourself, and we look forward to all of us really digging in until November. Thank you.